right, welcome into the latest edition of the Second Half Draft Show. I am your host, Juice, flying solo this evening. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2026. As the title of this particular live stream here on the Second Half Draft Show suggests, we're going to talk a little bit about college football playoffs. Of course, the quarterfinal games have come and gone. Semis are set. And then, of course, again, I alluded to the title of this live stream. I want to actually take a look at a number of industry mock draft simulators. I know for those of you who use the Couch Potato General Manager mock draft simulator, it does require some updates. It has been neglected, but just interested to kind of see what the industry is thinking in terms of some movements within their particular rankings. I've seen a few things on PFF working on a mock draft that I hope to share with you guys on the flagship channel of Couch Potato General Manager here over the weekend. So with that said, let me bring up the bracket, a little visual representation of what's going on in college football currently. And we had a pair of really, competitive games and then some not so competitive games in this quarterfinals of the 2025-2026 college football playoff. Can you see that? Let me bring it a bit closer so everybody can see it. So as you can see, and for those of you perhaps the uninitiated, I am a Hurricane fan, and my Canes is still alive, still kicking. I really like the matchup. I mentioned it last week, or the last time we did the live stream. The days are kind of blending together. I really do believe that Miami was in great shape as it relates to the matchup. I thought in terms of strength on strength, Miami matched up very well against Ohio State. Ohio State with a young, inexperienced quarterback. I think that certainly played a role, but just the physicality and the way Miami goes about controlling the line of scrimmage, I thought they had a terrific chance. Really loved the matchup, and of course it played out. Getting Keontae Scott back was huge. He had the big pick six, read out that little quick screen perfectly. It was a great game. Great game. I don't know that Carson Beck necessarily did anything spectacular, but he managed the game. He made some timely plays as well. I think there was a third and long that he was able to convert on the ground, lowered his shoulder in order to get it. Really galvanized the team as well. They ran the football fairly effectively. Both A&M and Ohio State did everything in their power to limit Malachi Tony, but other guys found a way to step up. And then, of course, when Bain and Mesidor, Lightfoot, when those guys get an opportunity to turn it up and get after the quarterback, they really do a great job. I think the second level of our defense has played well here in these college football playoffs as well. Wesley Basainth, Muhammad Torre, and then, of course, Popo and Cam Pruitt kind of coming in, spelling those guys at times. So I want to unpack this game a little bit more and talk about some of the prospects. But one of the main things that I wanted to kind of point out, unpack, is that this thought process that Ohio State, this version of Ohio State, the 2025 team, was every bit as good as last year's squad that won the national championship. Now, mind you, Ohio State lost a couple of games last year, and they actually didn't have a bye last year. They had to run the table during last year's playoffs, and it kind of reared its ugly head as it relates to teams having to take that bye, and do they kind of stumble out of the gate, come out of the gate a little bit slow because they had not played football in a few weeks. Three of the four teams that had byes lost in these college football playoffs last year. All four teams that were had that first round bye ended up losing. So only one of the 8 teams that have had a bye in this format have actually won their game. And that happens to be the Indiana Hoosiers, who I'm going to get to. Another incredibly impressive showing from the Hoosiers once again. But going back to the Miami-Ohio State game, again, I want to talk a little bit more about the game, and then I want to talk about the NFL draft prospects. Second half draft show. That's what we talk about. That's what we focus on here on this particular channel. So with that said, I thought Miami actually left some meat on the bone in this game. Right, they had an early drive that they lost a fumble. Fletcher lost a fumble. He redeemed himself certainly, but he lost a fumble. I thought I thought there were some opportunities that they just didn't capitalize on towards the end of the half as well. Um, they did a great job. The defense did a great job, though. They did a remarkable job. Ohio State certainly came out in the second half, made some adjustments. Miami played perhaps a little bit more conservatively, but as the game progressed, they kind of got back to brass tacks in terms of challenging Ohio State's offense. When I reference the 2024 version of Ohio State as compared to this one, I just don't see the parallels, right? Other than the similar record, as year ends, right, in terms of the two losses. But Ohio State, in my mind, had not been tested throughout the season. This team had not been tested at all, and it wasn't until the Big Ten championship that they played, to me, a legitimate team, right? Texas has developed and got better over the course of the season as Arch Manning continued to get better and make some adjustments along the way. But that opener against Texas, to me, was not a litmus of how good Ohio State was. It was more of a referendum on the fact that Texas was not ready. They were not ready for the Big Ten. They were not a college football playoff team, right? Um, the Ohio State defense has played remarkably well. You know what I mean? I mean, historic type of defense in terms of points allowed per game. But and don't get me wrong, lots of talent. They're going to be multiple first rounders: Arvell Reese, Caleb Downs. You got Caden McDonald now as part of that group. Sonny Styles. Upwards of four defenders will go in the first round in the first 40 or so picks. Perhaps as many as 5 or 6 will go in the first 40 picks here in the 2026 NFL draft. But you compare it to the downline that they had a season ago with Hamilton and Williams in the interior, and then you have those edges that may not necessarily have as high a ceiling as some of the guys that are there now, but their experience, right? The continuity and the fact that the guys behind them provided additional depth and they had a deeper rotation, I think certainly made a difference. You talk about the offense. Ohio State's offense, to me, was substantially better last season. Of course, they had Ibuka. They had a pair of first rounders along the offensive line. Uh, an experienced quarterback, and that backfield. That backfield was substantially better last season as compared to this year. So I didn't the minus 9.5. Of course, that changed a bit as it got closer to kickoff, and it went down to 7.5. I never bought it. I never bought that Ohio State was far and away better than this Hurricanes team, and certainly, based on what we've seen over the Hurricanes' last 4 or 5 games compared to the Ohio State team we saw in the Big Ten championship, Miami was playing better football. Miami's playing a better football. And again, they control the line of scrimmage, the more physical team. I like the fact, there was missed calls in this game. That spot, there was a spot early in the game that I thought was egregious, but they let the guys play, right? There could have been substantially more holding calls. That there certainly could have been a number of pass interference, whether it be offensive or defensive, but they let the guys play for the most part. They were very consistent throughout the game, even though, like I said, that there were missed calls. They were consistent in terms of letting the players play. Under those circumstances, you can live with it. You can live with it. I don't think this game hinged on a call, right? That's what you want to avoid. Whether you're throwing flags incessantly or you're swallowing the whistle, you don't want the referees determining the game, in the grand scheme of things. So great win for the Canes. But again, I didn't think this Ohio State team was quite up to par as compared to last year's team. And speaking of Miami, you know, I got to tell you, we're going to look into some of these industry mock draft simulators and kind of see what their writers, their analysts are thinking as far as rankings are concerned. If you got Akeem Mesidor outside your top 50, top 40, you're doing it wrong in my mind. I get that he's an older player, right? He'll be a 25-year-old rookie, man, but it's not the first time that that's happened. I think about like Will McDonald. I think Will McDonald may have been, pushing 25 when the Jets took him, in the top half of the first round a few years ago. I just think Mesidor and of course Bain. Bain has been terrific. Bain, obviously, if you're familiar with any of the content, you check out Couch Potato General Manager did a big expose on Ruben Bain when I don't think Bain was considered perhaps the top defensive prospect in the class, right? He's been nails throughout this college football playoffs. It starts up front. Starts up front, whether it be on the offensive side of the ball with Maui Noah and Inez Cooper on the right side, Brockemeyer at center. You got but Markel Bell, who I think certainly is playing himself into, perhaps a day two selection on the left side of that offensive line in Miami. They're big, they're physical, and they control the line of scrimmages, and that's where a lot of games are won and lost. And like I said, Beck hasn't been spectacular, but he's been solid. He's managed the games. He's made the plays necessary. He's converted on those third and manageables. You know what I'm saying? And I like the fact that although he's not a great athlete in terms of scrambling and running, he's been decisive. He's been decisive when he does so, right? Which keeps you ahead of the chains. Get you a critical third down conversion, or turns that 2nd and 8 into a 3rd and 4, as opposed to a 3rd and long. Which makes all the difference. It just opens up the playbook so much more for Shannon Dawson. Corey Heatherman has done a tremendous job with Miami's defense. Night and day. I mentioned that before. Night and day as compared to last season. I think as Miami moves on to the Fiesta Bowl, and they're going to face the Ole Miss Rebels, and we'll get to that matchup between Ole Miss and Georgia. I think if Miami can get some of their corners back, OJ Frederic, who's not draft eligible, Damari Brown, who I do believe is draft eligible, although I expect him back considering he's dealt with some injuries. Hopefully, those two players are healthy, because the Rebels have waves of pass catchers that they're throwing at you, and their quarterback Trinidad Chambliss is playing at a high level. They're going to need those bodies. They're going to need those bodies. I love what I've seen from Jacoby Thomas on the back end, along with, I mentioned, Keontae Scott. I want to stop with Keontae Scott for just a second, man, because I've had the pleasure of watching him for the balance of the season. I think certainly if you're just kind of tuning into Miami, you've seen him make plays, a ton of plays over the course of the last couple of games against A&M. I think he had multiple sacks, and this is him returning after maybe missing, a few games a month or so due to injury. We thought maybe his season was over. Miami gets into the playoffs. Keontae Scott gets back healthy, and he's been a difference maker the entire season. Playmaker, man. He does everything at a high level, whether it be coverage, incredibly intelligent. His open field tackling, you can blitz him off the nickel as a off the corner as a nickel. He can play a little safety for you. You can even put him out on the boundary in limited spots. I think he, outside of Bain and Mesidor, has been the most important player on Miami's defense. And there's been a lot of good play, a lot of guys making a difference, but Keontae Scott has been incredible. He's a terrific portal find. He's coming from Auburn. He's from California originally. Um, I've been thoroughly impressed with him. And if you don't have him as your top nickel in the 2026 NFL draft class, you probably are doing it wrong. You're probably doing it wrong. And on the last point I'm going to make with respect to Scott is with respect to the position that he plays. It's such a demanding and important position in this day and age. We see most teams play 11 personnel. That's 3 receivers, 1 back, 1 tight end, right? You need that nickel to obviously be a defensive back, but he's also your third linebacker in a lot of instances. So he's got to be able to set a physical edge and make open field tackles, and he provides that athletic pass rusher when you decide to blitz from the defensive backfield. Like, you think about the top nickels in the NFL, and a couple of guys that come to mind immediately, obviously Brian Branch. The Lions defense is night and day when he's in the lineup. Jalen Petrie is huge. Houston, the Texans have, I think they're both in the top defense in the NFL. At least statistically, Jalen Petrie is a big proponent of that defense. The Kenny Moores over the year, like these guys are indispensable on the defense. They don't get the same kind of fanfare and love as the boundary corners, but I think play in and play out, they're just as important, if not more important, to these modern NFL defenses. It allows you to remain in nickel when you have a nickel defender that plays so effectively and is such a complete football player. And again, with respect to Scott, it's not just the physical aspects of the game. He checks those boxes, but he's so bright. He's always in the right position. He doesn't get penalized. He's an excellent football player, man. And again, as I mentioned with respect to Mesidor, if you don't have Scott in your top 50, top 40, you probably just haven't seen enough of him. It's hard to deny how good of a player he is. And I think when you talk about defensive backs at the quarter position, I don't know that I love this class. I think there's some good names, but I don't know that I love this class. I certainly have more work to do. So let me preface that. But he's fairly high. He's fairly high on my rankings among the defensive backs in general. What's going on, Mrs. C. Prasky? Happy New Year to you. That's nice. I like that. We're gonna have to check that out, Mrs. C. It's nice. That's nice. Nick Manowari. Yeah, yeah. Huge season last year. He's been a difference maker for Seattle. I was working on the mock draft here, Mrs. C, and I know Seattle is in that 32 hole, and I was thinking, well, they certainly need to address the cornerback position. Got some expiring contracts there. There's some names that I thought were intriguing. I opted for a receiver though, and I think you'll like it. I think you'll like it just to pair with JSN and Torrey Horton if he could stay healthy. But that one's actually a little bit fluid. But I initially in my mind I'm thinking receiver, Mrs. C. All right. So that's the Miami Ohio State matchup, and just talking a little bit about some of the prospects. Another prospect again, I don't want to fail to mention. He actually had the game sealing INT. Jacoby Thomas, a transfer from Tennessee. He was kind of a rotational safety, but he's been very good this season. Again, the turnaround from a coaching and talent, particularly on the back end of Miami's defense, has been remarkable. It's been remarkable, man. I you couldn't have more of a defensive 180. Last season guys couldn't get lined up. Guys were never in the right position, and then when they happened to be, they couldn't make the play, whether it be making a play on the football or making an open field tackle. It's a different story this year. It's a different story this year. Miami is buttoned up defensively, and they're incredibly physical, as I mentioned. And I think we talk about X's and O's. We talk about the, the Jims and the Joes. We talk about all these different things, but at the bedrock, at its core, this game is still a certain level of physicality that you have to come with, and typically the more physical team tends to come out on top. So yeah, Mr. C, I was it was Chris Bell. It's corner Chris Bell. I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm taking a look at those contracts there in Seattle. I'm looking at the rosters. I'm looking at who's available on the board. There's a number of corners that you could go. There's a handful, but in terms of body types and complementing JSN, I think Chris Bell is the guy. You could go with a KC Concepcion. There's some other guys there from a talent perspective, but in terms of overall skill set and body types and trying to, as DP, Damian Parsons of Bleacher Report likes to say, you want to build your receiving room like a starting five, like an NBA roster. You got to have a 4, you got to have a 5, you got to have guards. You know what I'm saying? You got to have different types for different types of situations, different areas of the football field. So yeah, I was thinking Chris Bell there, Mr. C, for sure. All right, let's move on to the noon game from yesterday, New Year's Day. This one was disappointing, man. The Oregon Texas Tech game was disappointing. The Orange Bowl. I thought we would get a better showing from Texas Tech. Now, I will say Texas Tech defense showed up, right? And one of the players that I think, Couch Potato General Manager, the second half draft show, we have been higher on for the balance of the season. You can go back as far as summer scouting. David Bailey, perhaps the top pure pass rusher. Although I think he's a much more complete player. Used odd usage at Stanford. He transfers to Texas Tech, and of course Romello Height has gotten a lot of love. Texas Tech defensively, I think, is a good group. It's a team that I want to dig into a little bit more, see what other prospects might be out there that should be considered here in the 2026 NFL draft. But David Bailey in particular, like I said, we've been all over Bailey. Thought most of these publications were far too low. I think at the beginning of the season, he was typically in the 3rd round. You're not seeing that anymore. He's a top 5, top 10-ish type player for most publications. And like I said, we here at Second Half Draft Show, Couch Potato General Manager, we were ahead of that. We were ahead of that. He's been the guy. I think Drew actually stamped him back in the summer during summer scouting, stamped him and said, You'll see it this year. Stanford didn't really know what they were doing. When Stanford had success, he was on the field. When they didn't have success, he was off the field. The usage didn't make any sense. He goes to Texas Tech and really does a great job. Texas Tech defense had them in this game. I believe it was 6-0, 9-0 at the half, right? It was Texas Tech's offense that really let them down, their quarterback in particular, right? Turnovers, bad decisions, missing open throws, inaccuracy. It was almost as if the moment was too much. Of course, they were coming off the bye. A lot of expectations, a lot of expectation. There was a huge investment, boosters. That's why this Texas Tech team, their roster really looked different. And of course, I think they had the caliber of defense to compete with anyone, but their offense definitely let them down. I don't know that Oregon did anything great in this game. Dante Moore was okay. Running game, all right. Oregon has a ton of talent. Don't get me wrong. I thought their defense certainly came to play. Their freshman corner, 5-star, he's a starter. Finney had a pair of INTs in this one, but I think Texas Tech. I want to give Oregon its credit. Certainly want to give Oregon its credit. They make the plays that were available to them. They were opportunistic, but I thought Texas Tech really beat themselves. Their offense just did not complement the way their defense played. Oregon's defense obviously took advantage of Texas Tech's mishaps, and to get shut out is rough. I mentioned Oregon's litany of NFL draft prospects. They certainly have a handful on either side of the ball. Offensive line, Dante Moore. I think I've mentioned it before. I have Moore as a close second to Mendoza. It probably the gap will widen a little bit. I think, and I've mentioned this before as well. Dante Moore could benefit. He certainly should benefit from going back to school. But I just think because of this quarterback class and just the disappointments. You look around the college football landscape. You think about the Drew Allers and the Nussmeyers and Cade Klubnik, who is terrible. Mateers of the world, John Mateer, Ty Simpson, who again I've never been high on, and I think the publications are starting to kind of figure out where he should be slotted. I think because it's such a light year in terms of the quarterback position, Darian Mensah of Duke is going back to school. I think he certainly could have found his way into the first round, the latter parts of the first round. Um, I actually think him going back to school is a good call, despite the fact that it's Duke. Duke is coming off, the ACC championship. They won their bowl game. I believe it was the Sun Bowl. So they're riding a high. Mensah could be the first quarterback off the board next year. He could definitely be the first quarterback off the board. Moore is as talented as anybody in the country. I think he just needs more reps, and I worry about him a little bit from the perspective of where he's going to land. I think that is such a big part of the success that these young quarterbacks have as well. When you talk about the 2026 NFL draft or NFL draft in general, Mendoza, assuming things hold where they're at, Mendoza would go to the Raiders first overall. And while I think Mendoza is more prepared to start earlier than Dante Moore, they still have Geno for a year. Geno hasn't been good. The Raiders have a lot of work to do on the offensive line. I wouldn't want to start Mendoza until I improve that offensive line. Right. I'm going to make sure I make it a point of emphasis here in free agency and certainly in the draft. You may not be able to get additional draft capital because you need that quarterback. Right. I don't think Geno's the answer. So you got to figure out the offensive line, during free agency and through the balance of the draft after you take Mendoza first overall. That's the direction I would go in. But you don't have to rush him out there. In the case of Moore, I'm thinking the Jets. Right? I'm thinking the Jets are probably the next most quarterback needy team. I think they do present a slightly better situation in terms of the offensive line. But when you talk about coaching, when you talk about the kind of the foundation of it all, to rush Moore out there, who again I believe he needs more reps. I think he needs more experience. I think he would benefit from that, despite all of his talent. I think it's a tougher ask ultimately, right? You don't have that buffer necessarily. I don't know if they would want to go with the Tyrod Taylor to start the. I just don't know how it would work. And the Jets don't have a great history of developing their quarterbacks. That certainly is is a specter. I hopefully Aaron Glenn gets it right. I don't know if they're going to stick with their current offensive coordinator, who's fairly inexperienced in his own right. But I think just because there's a lack of depth among the quarterback position in the 2026 NFL draft. I think more will declare. Certainly, if Oregon goes on to beat Indiana, compete for a national championship, I think more could go. I don't know. I don't know that the outcome of this game will matter because again, I expect more to be the second quarterback off the board and go within the first 2 to 3 selections. So, um, just think he could benefit from going back to school. All things considered. Talking about Alabama and Indiana, I mentioned Mendoza, and I got to give him more credit. I just found myself giving Mendoza more and more credit. And again, I've mentioned it before. I've had a film breakdown of Mendoza queued up for about 3 months, 3.5 months, just never finalized because he just continues to add to the resume. I'm sure if you watch this game, you saw the stat of how effective he's been against the blitz, man. I think he has 19 or 20 TDs, no INTs against the blitz to lead the FBS this year. It's the accuracy, it's the decision making, it's the timely decision to tuck and take off. Mendoza's been pushing all the right buttons, man. He's been pushing all the right buttons. He's demonstrated the ability to make every throw. Early on, I was concerned about the proliferation, just the frequency of RPO, but as I watch more and more of him, you see what he does off schedule, outside of the friendly confines of the RPO. Within the RPO, the accuracy, the decision making, it's hard not to like Mendoza. It's hard not to like what he's done. You obviously there's a tendency to kind of juxtapose him because considering he's like the consensus #1 quarterback versus Caleb Williams. You know what I'm saying? The Drake Mays of the world, and you're like, does Mendoza move the needle quite like those guys? Maybe not, but maybe he should. Maybe he should. I'm not saying that he's making the types of off script plays that Caleb Williams does, but when you talk about being able to check all the boxes, right? Functional mobility, accuracy, decision making, arm strength to make those NFL throws, hole shots. You know what I'm saying? Like, and perhaps most importantly, how he plays when there's adversity, when things aren't necessarily going according to plan, his ability to put a bad play behind him quickly and get the team, get that offense back on track. Mendoza checks a lot of boxes, man. He checks a lot of boxes. So I do think there's a little bit more of a gap between he and more than I probably originally thought. I wouldn't say seismic by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think I think Mendoza is clearly the top quarterback in the 2026 NFL draft class. And Indiana put it on Alabama. They got their Cooper, their receiver, who's another good one, another prospect that again, if you're kind of looking for a receiver in that second to fourth round range, Cooper along with Surratt are really intriguing prospects. Becker has played really well as well for Indiana. Their offensive line, their defense, man, is just again. I mentioned physicality when I was talking about Miami. Indiana's physical, man. They're physical at the point of attack, both sides of the line of scrimmage, and Indiana is buttoned up. Those players are so well coached, so well prepared. Their film study, their technique, being where you're supposed to be so that you can make a play, and of course when they're there, they are consistently there. They're making this play. They're making those plays. They are a lightly penalized team. Like Indiana's going to be hard to beat, regardless of who comes out of these brackets. Like I obviously Indiana went to Oregon and won that game. I think they beat Oregon again. Honestly, I do. I don't think Oregon is physical enough. I think they're certainly talented enough, but I don't know that they're physical enough to match what Indiana does. And now we're talking a neutral site on top of it. Um, Ole Miss, I think Indiana probably, Ole Miss is going to score points. Don't get me wrong, but considering how buttoned up Indiana is in terms of assignments and their physicality, their ability to score points, more so than a Miami per se. I think they match up incredibly well against Ole Miss. Perhaps Ole Miss's speed might give them a little trouble, but I think I like Indiana in that matchup. I'm obviously you see a little homerism here. I think Miami's physicality is the one thing that could kind of equalize things against Indiana. I think those teams are actually pretty similar. Miami has the edge in terms of pass rush. Indiana, the edge in terms of quarterback play. But I think those teams are actually quite similar. So it's going to be interesting. The semifinals, I think, is going to be interesting. I don't love the Ole Miss matchup for Miami. I think Trinidad Chambliss, it presents a problem. It's going to come down to Miami's ability to obviously affect the quarterback, but you got to be disciplined in terms of rush lanes, right? Because if you let him break the pocket, and they do a lot of moving him around and changing the launch point, so you can't to avoid and help neutralize that opposing pass rush. Miami's going to have a plan for that. I think ball control offense, which is Miami's game, is certainly something that you're going to want to employ, establish the line of scrimmage. But I do think there's going to have to be some more explosives coming out of Miami in this particular matchup. Still like my Canes, but this is a tough matchup. The Fiesta Bowl is a tough matchup. I want to go back to Indiana real quick, just in terms of talking about draft prospects. Actually, I'll start with Oregon. I mentioned more. You got a couple players, Whirls, Pregnon along the offensive line, Mario Washington on the defensive side of the ball, Mateo Ungalele off the edge, Dylan Thinneman at safety. So again, a ton of NFL talent with respect to Oregon. D'Angelo Pounds, the defensive back, maybe a little bit undersized, but he plays on the boundary for Indiana, is a really good one. He's a really good one. He's from South Florida, headsy player. They had him matched up in the Big Ten championship. They had him matched up in man coverage with Jeremiah Smith for large chunks of that game, and he did an excellent job holding up against Smith in that particular contest. So he's another corner. May not necessarily check the boxes in terms of the physical traits or size, the measurables per se, but again, he's a great example of what I've been saying as it relates to how well, how smart, how physical, how fast Indiana is playing. All right, so that's going to do it first half of the show. Just kind of a recap here in terms of the college football playoff. Kind of foreshadowing as it relates to the semifinals, which will be next week, the 8th and the 9th. I got Miami and Indiana moving on. I got Miami and Indiana moving on, but we shall see. That's why they play the games, of course. I wanted to take some time this evening to look at, as I mentioned earlier, the mock draft simulators from a couple of different publications, right? And Mr. Seabraski mentioned Pro Football Network earlier. Let's take a look at PFF and NFL Mock Draft Database, and I just want to peruse their overall rankings and their position rankings to see if there's anything that kind of jumps out to me that is very different than my thoughts based on my film study, my evaluation, of course, which is still incomplete. Of course, we got the Senior Bowl coming up later this month. I will be on location, so looking forward to that. And then, of course, we really supercharge our NFL draft coverage once the Senior Bowl comes and goes. You'll see a lot more content coming out of our flagship channel, Couch Potato General Manager. But with that said, let me pull up PFF's mock draft simulator and let's take a look at the rankings together. And I did notice, because as I mentioned, I was working on a mock draft. Haven't done one in months. So well overdue on that front. But I noticed that they had the quarterbacks bunched up. They had Mendoza, maybe a spot ahead of Dante Moore, and then, maybe 2 or 3 spots below or Ty Simpson. They've made a significant adjustment, and they've moved Ty Simpson completely out of the first round. I think perhaps even into the third round, which again, I said it, and it's nice. It's nice to see the industry folks kind of, corroborate your thoughts. I like being out on the limb as well. Don't get me wrong. Very, very much original thoughts from this particular platform, but I think they made a good decision in terms of adjusting their rankings with respect to Ty Simpson, because Ty Simpson is not at the level of a Mendoza or Dante Moore for that matter. He simply isn't. I think the main thing that I've always pointed to with respect to, what kind of separates those guys, Simpson is a player who I think will benefit from more reps, right? More experience, right? You thought he might be able to take advantage of the fact, not unlike Dante Moore, for example, that the class has kind of been turned on its ear. The guys that we anticipated being in the conversation among the quarterbacks going in the first round or the first couple of days, are no longer in that conversation. You know what I'm saying? But Simpson does not deal well with pressure, right? If you can take away his first read, if he has to move and kind of come off his read, it's a precipitous fall in terms of his accuracy, his decision making. It has to be clean, and that's just not the reality of the situation. Yes, you want guys who can make the routine plays, and certainly play with great timing and anticipation, but there are instances where things aren't clean, and that doesn't mean that you need to go and escape and be an athlete on the perimeter and make all of these off-platform throws. And by off-platform throws, I'm talking about arm slots and things of that nature. But you got to be able to slide. You got to be able to navigate that pocket. You got to be able to stare down the barrel of the gun, take a big hit, and deliver the football. And I just don't see it from Ty Simpson. Right? He's got work to do with respect to that. And too many times I've seen him look below average, right? Not just a situation where he's just managing the game per se, but he's looked like he's been overwhelmed. Like it's too much for him. You know what I mean? And I think when you have multiple occurrences of that on film, you really have to take a step back. You really have to reevaluate, what kind of player he is. So that said, let's take a look at what we have here in the form of rankings. And listen, I'm not going to argue with Caleb Downs being the top prospect in the class. I won't argue with it. I won't argue with it. If you watch Caleb Downs, you can just see how incredibly good he is at everything. Right? I'm talking about an elite tackler, one of the best tacklers I've studied, at any position, linebacker, safety, whatever the case may be. Right? He just generally does not miss tackles. He seems to always be in the right position. Form tackles as well, breaks down properly. He covers, he closes quickly. I think Ohio State could have done a better job of utilizing his overall skill set. He plays that nickel. As Drew likes to say, safety is a new versatility. He said that almost 10 years ago, right? So it is what it is at this point, right? You got to be versatile to be an upper echelon safety in today's game. And Downs is a remarkable talent, man. He completely neutralized my dad, Malachi Tony. You can just see the difference. Malachi Tony being a young player who reclassified, so actually should be a high school senior right now, but here he is in the college football playoffs, big difference maker. But you could see the physical difference, the physical strength, right? And of course the violence that Caleb Downs played. It overwhelmed Tony. It overwhelmed Tony. Tony Sutton mixed it up, blocking. You know what I'm saying? But Caleb Downs is a terrific player. I think obviously he won't go first overall because teams aren't going to give him the type of respect he deserves, considering he's a safety. So it's a positional discernment that's going to probably take place in those war rooms. But given the fact that he can do so many things at such a high level, play that nickel for you, be that extra linebacker, obviously play in the deep parts of the field, blitz, so on and so forth. He shouldn't get out of the top 10. He should not get out of the top 10. But as far as overall player rank, I'm comfortable with him at one. I'm not on board with Arvell Reese being number 2 though. And I know Reese has had a tremendous year, right? What he does well, he does at a very high level, right? He's sideline to sideline, explosive, second level defender, and of course he can rush the passer, right? Which if you, it depends on what kind of scheme you're leveraging. When I think about the linebacker position, I am not one of those individuals who feels like, okay, well, you can just wait on linebacker. I think there are certain players that are worth early selections. Whether they be a linebacker, whether it be a running back. Of course, when you talk about running back, is the team ready for that, right? I think you got to have certain things in place in order to take a running back early, right? But the part of Arvell Reese's game that gives me a bit of concern, and it's going to come down to how he's utilized to a certain degree, is his pass coverage, right? I think he certainly has the requisite athleticism, but his technique, His eyes, they're not always necessarily where they need to be. He's better sideline to sideline moving forward, right? When you have to drop him into a zone, I don't know that he's as there are better players. There are better players in this draft class, in terms of that second level defender in the passing game as compared to Arvell Reese. So I wouldn't move him down a ton, but I wouldn't go as high as number two. I would probably have Ruben Bain here, or Ruben Bain one, Caleb Downs two. But Reese is certainly a top 10 player as well. Jeremiah Love, again, phenomenal. We talked about that running back position, right? Who early on in the draft is perhaps just a running back away, right? That's kind of my question. The Commanders, for instance, are a team that has a lot of work to do on the defensive side of the ball, right? It's a defensive rich draft. You getting Jaden Daniels back. You were in the conference final, conference championship a season ago. You got a dearth of talent, bodies, frankly, in that backfield. Love could take some pressure off of Jaden Daniels, man. I do think there's some other areas of their team edge. Certainly, they need to address at really every level of their defense. Um, maybe some more complementary pieces in terms of the passing game, but Love is a difference maker in the passing game as well. So I think Jeremiah Love will go early. I think he's going to go early. I think he's so explosive and he does so many things at a high level. It's hard to imagine him getting out of the top half of the first round, and certainly top 10 is a possibility. Mendoza, Dante Moore, I mentioned how those quarterbacks are closer. Bain, Bailey, of course, PFF showing some respect to David Bailey. I don't think he was this high originally, but certainly the way he's played, Jordan Tyson. Here's another one that I'm not certain of. Cardell Tate is, it may be a byproduct of the fact that you have a Jeremiah Smith, right? He doesn't get the number of looks. You go back 2 seasons, you got Ibuka. You go back a season before that, you got Marvin Harrison Jr. You know what I'm saying? Like he's never been the guy, right? But he's a playmaker. He makes plays at every level of the field. He has great hands. He had a little alligator arm situations. Quarterback almost hung him out to dry. I think he had maybe his first drop of the season in the quarterfinal game against Miami. So great hands, incredible hands, perhaps the best hands in the class. While I think he's a first round prospect, I don't love him in the top 10. I don't love him. I think he's maybe more of a top 20, top 25 player. You think about it. Do you think Carnell Tate is head and tails better than Ibuka? Probably not. Probably not. Very good player. Very good player. I just don't necessarily view him as a top 10 prospect. Peter Woods, certainly, when you talk about what Woods does between the lines, and it doesn't always show up in the box score, certainly worthy of a top 10, top 15 selection. Clemson was just bad. Clemson was just bad. So don't let that fool you with respect to Peter Woods. Mississippi, I'd love to have love, but he'll be gone by the time we pick. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, my friend. He will be off the board. Sonny Styles. I think he came into this quarterfinal matchup against Miami having not missed a tackle the entire season. He did miss one. I do recall Fletcher making him miss. So he has helped himself a ton. I think Styles, Reese gets the edge, obviously, because of what he can do in terms of getting after the passer. But I actually like Reese more in this range, and Styles perhaps just a little bit lower. Again, both considered first round prospects, but I like Reese more in this 11 to 14 range a little bit more. I think he's going to go higher than that, but that's where I kind of view him a bit more. Makai Lemon, I'm okay with that. I actually like Lemon a little bit more than Carnell Tate. I would put Lemon ahead of Carnell Tate. Jamal McCoy, Falk, Master Delaney, Cassius Howe, man. This was a Headley special. Going back to summer scouting, this is a player that was lightly discussed going into the 2025 campaign, but Headley nailed it with Cassius Howe. And once Drew and I had an opportunity to kind of see his film, we completely understood why Howe was set to have such a big year. Caleb Banks, big time talent, just has struggled to stay healthy. But I respect the ranking here because he is that good. He is that good. Spencer Fano, Francis Mawinoa, I think should be moved up. Honestly, I like I said, I would move there. A couple players above them that they should be closer to. Right, I'm not saying that they should be rated higher, but certainly closer to. Maui Noah has been terrific in these college football playoffs. Funnel and his counterpart Lomu, you'll see just a little bit lower here. Um, they've been excellent. They were big keys to their bowl win, Utah's bowl win. Avion Terrell, another good one from Clemson. Just kind of lost in a bad season. I'm okay with that particular ranking. Then you got Denzel Boston, Mississippi. PFF giving him some respect there. Caden McDonald has played his way into that bottom half of the first round. I'm okay with that. Romello Hyde I mentioned earlier. Ione out of Penn State. Parker picked it up as the season progressed. Again, Clemson, this is not uncommon. Clemson's going to have good defenders. They're going to have quality defenders, right? Now, I will say this. Once you get to TJ Parker, for me, among edge rushers, it gets interesting, right? So let me just filter by edge here. Take a look through that prism because there's a name that I mentioned earlier that I think is far too low on PFF's rankings. So again, Bain, Bailey, Falk, Howell, I'm okay with all of that. Romello Hyatt Parker, R. Mason Thomas, Joshua Joseph, really good player. I mentioned Ngalele, LT Overton, different body type. There's Drew's guy out of Illinois. Good names. I think we're just waiting entirely too long to get to Mesidor. Outside the top 50 is criminal. It's criminal. I get it. 6-year player, older rookie. He's going to be 25 in his rookie season. I know certain organizations value, that age. They want to be talking extension at 25, right? Not at 30. You know what I'm saying? They want to be talking about long-term deal at your second contract at 25, not at 30. But Mesidor is ready to go, man. If you watch Miami like I watch Miami, you see it. You see it week in and week out. The work he's done with Jason Taylor along the defensive line. I'm okay with Mesidor at the bottom of the first round. I'm okay with it, right? Certainly within the first 40 to 50 selections, though. He should not get out of the second round by any stretch of the imagination. You want instant juice to your pass rush? Bring in Akeem Mesidor. He can reduce down if you'd like. He's too quick. He's gotten quicker. He played bigger. He was heavier early in his career. They had him playing 4-eye, 5 technique. They're letting him be a pass rusher. They're letting him be a true edge. They'll let him do some 3 technique to take advantage of a matchup. I like that. Mesidor is certainly too low. I really like this draft class in terms of edges. You got guys like Dennis Sutton, Kamara. Not as high on SAP as compared to Headley and Drew, but and to me, this ranking makes a bit more sense. But when you just when you start talking about Tyreek Sapp here, towards the end of the third round, fourth round, you get a sense of how deep this draft class is in terms of edge rushers. Saka, Kenyatta Jackson, like there's some really good names, some really, really good names and some significant depth among edge rushers. I think the main change here would be moving up Mesidor. I think he should be in a conversation with R. Mason Thomas, Joshua Joseph. I absolutely believe that. Even TJ Parker for that matter, and Romello Hyde, right? I think teams obviously will love some of the inherent traits, length that Romello Hyde possesses. They may feel that way about TJ Parker as well. But certainly, within this R. Mason Thomas, Joshua Joseph realm, is where I like Akeem Mesidor. Yeah. All right. So let me go back to the overall rankings. Just looking at the first 32 to 50 players or so, just getting a sense of any significant omissions and where my thought process aligns with PFF. We'll take a look at PFN in the mock draft simulator, NFL mock draft database here shortly. Kenyon Sadiq, Kanan Proctor, I mentioned Mississippi, Casey Concepcion. He's a big time talent, man. So I get the ranking. I get the ranking. Caleb Lomu, CJ Allen. I'll tell you this. I'm gonna put it this way. This gap between CJ Allen and Sonny Styles is entirely too large. It's entirely too large. I get it. Sonny Styles is a better defender in terms of the pass game, and I mentioned how I would drop Arvell Reese for that reason. If you're planning on playing him predominantly off ball, right? Again, what he does coming forward, sideline to sideline, is incredibly impressive. But CJ Allen is so good against the run. Bro. He is so good against the run, and if you watch the way, and it's all very cyclical, right? You watch how NFL teams are running the football and taking advantage of all of that nickel defense that's being run and these smaller, lighter linebackers. I think CJ Allen is good against the pass. I don't know that he's great, but he's good against the pass. But what he's an elite run defender, and I actually have him slightly ahead of Sonny Styles. They're very close because of what Sonny Styles has done. I think it was Sonny Styles catching up to Allen, not the other way around in this particular instance. Colton Hood in Jamal McCoy's absence has been excellent for Tennessee. Kristen Miller, big time defender for Georgia. R. Mason Thomas. These rankings here, these names make sense to me. Elijah Surratt, Chris Bell might move him up slightly just because how big he is. Barham, I think he got lost in the whole Michigan situation. You know, Michigan just not being very good. I think he's certainly a guy. Definitely a guy. Keith Abney, LT Overton, Anthony Hill Jr., of course, Texas having their struggles. Hill Jr. slides, injuries. AJ Halsey is a good defender. Good safety is a name to keep an eye on. Jeremy Bernard, Gooseby. Yeah, all of this sounds good to me at this point, the first 50 or so. You know, then you start talking about my guy, Jonah Coleman, Deontay Lawson. I might have Thieneman just a little bit higher than 55. The last thing I wanted to point out, Ramsey Corleone, names that we've talked about a lot on this particular stream, not this particular stream, but second half draft show. To be clear, Ty Simpson. Look at where Ty Simpson is. Right, you can see his ADP is significantly higher because he was being drafted, you know, in the top half of the first round in a lot of instances. But this ranking to me makes a ton of sense towards the end of the second round. Right, if he were to come out, I think he should go back. I think he should go back to Alabama and continue to work on his craft. But there's a significant gap between he and the top two quarterbacks in this draft class. There's no question about it. And I think PFF got it right here. All right. So that's PFF's top 50 to 60 players or so. Chris Braslin's another good name there. He had a big season. I think PFF did a pretty good job. I mentioned a couple different, areas where I feel a little bit differently. I would certainly have CJ Allen higher, Kean Mesidor higher. But I think they got the quarterbacks right for the most part. I may be a little lower on Arvell Reese as compared to the consensus, but I expect him to go high. I think he just there's just certain elements of his game that you cannot teach, and he had a huge season, So not mad at it. I think these are solid rankings. Okay. So let's take a look. Let's transition to Pro Football Network's mock draft simulator. Right? And Mr. C had mentioned they have some new features there. That's one thing I do like about Pro Football Networks. I tend to, at least historically, I haven't looked at their mock draft simulator recently at all. Historically, there's some pretty significant differences in terms of rankings between my rankings and theirs. But I really like the continual effort they've made with respect to their mock draft simulator, right? They certainly have the corresponding resources, but they continue to iterate. They continue to iterate and improve that particular experience. So I like that quite a bit. Let's see here. One round. We'll do solo player, enter draft solo. And they have the Pro Football Network consensus, ESPN, PFF, and the Athletic rankings. So that's a really interesting feature to your point, Mr. Seabrasky. All right. Probably do this exercise once more ahead of the Senior Bowl. Okay. All right, so we'll take a look at what the Pro Football Network, what they're looking at here, and of course they have Arvell Reese as the top prospect in the class, and I, like I said out the gate, I disagree. I disagree. They push Caleb Downs a bit, which is understandable considering the safety position, but when you just talk about defensive, just players, just overall players, yeah, he's one or two for me. Not a huge difference here as it relates to Jordan Tyson, Jeremiah Love. They're a little bit higher on Keldrick Falk, which I'm okay with. I'm okay with. I like Keldrick Falk pretty much anywhere in the top 15. They too are bullish on Carnell Tate. In fact, they have Carnell Tate as the top receiver, which I disagree with. I think Jordan Tyson He's the top receiver. I actually have Tate as the third wideout in this class. I really do appreciate the fact that they have Spencer Fun on the top 10. Maui Noah shouldn't be too far behind there. He is at 14. So PFN is definitely higher on the top offensive tackles as compared to Pro Football Focus. Sonny Styles. They still have Ty Simpson here in the first round, which I agree. I disagree with. I definitely disagree with that. They're a little lower on Sunny Styles as compared to PFF, which is okay. I think 18 is love. I still think too low on CJ Allen. They too have Caleb Banks in their first round. Again, I think that's just I think it's just another indication of how good Caleb Banks has been when he's been healthy. I'm actually fairly comfortable with him being ranked 26 because he just hasn't been able to play. But PFF, they're like, we don't care. We got him at 18. He's that good. Keith Abney, TJ Parker, Kristen Miller, AJ Halsey, slightly higher on AJ Halsey compared to PFF. So I like that. Then you got Chris Bell once more. I don't see it, Mrs. C. I don't see it. And maybe I'm wrong. I think it's a matter of usage. It's a matter of usage, right? I think Abuka certainly was better than well, Abuka was coming off a really big year. He was coming off a really big year. Tate has some good numbers, good TD totals. He's got some good numbers, man. And like I said, he catches everything. He catches everything, man. So I'm okay with Tate in the first round. I do not see a top 5 player. I don't see a top 10 player when I watch Carnell Tate. I see a very good low end 1, high end receiver 2 that should be taken within the first 20 picks or so, not top 5. I just don't see him, at that level, right? Again, it could be a byproduct of just his circumstance, his situation. He's always played with the likes of a Marvin Harrison Jr. or an Abuka or Jeremiah Smith, and he's never been the guy in Ohio State's offense. He when you talk about the things that you're looking for from a receiver, right? He consistently catches the football. Like I said, he catches everything, right? He's demonstrated the ability to beat man-to-man coverage. He can beat you at multiple levels of the field. So whether it be short, intermediate, vertically, he can beat you in those various ways. Excellent, typically excellent in the contested catch situation. So there's a lot to like. There's a sense that I get, or rather I don't get, in terms of him being a top 5 prospect, right? I think he's being pushed up a little bit because this class is really good from a depth perspective among the receivers, but you don't have, you know, a Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors necessarily in this class, right? You don't have, that player, a Teteroa McMillan per se. You know what I'm saying? Like if you think Carnell Tate is on the level of McMillan, I disagree with that. I disagree with that. So certainly not a Jamar Chase. Certainly not a Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson, right? Exactly, and of course, Jefferson wasn't even viewed that highly among NFL teams. He was actually selected in the area that I would feel most comfortable taking Carnell Tate, right? Despite the fact that Justin Jefferson had a lot more production, you know what I'm saying? So maybe that's the thought process, right? Perhaps overshadowed. Justin Jefferson just wasn't overshadowed. Burrow was a quarterback, and historic offense there with LSU and Chase. But Jefferson, from a statistical output perspective, from a production perspective, he was not outclassed by Chase by any great stretch, right? Despite Chase putting up video game type numbers. Tate's production is certainly more modest than Justin Jefferson's, but I would take them in the same area. Well, at least where Justin Jefferson was selected. I think he was selected maybe in early 20s, late teens, the year he came out. So I would feel more comfortable with that in terms of Carnell Tate. If I'm going early on Tate from my eyes, the earliest I'm going is just outside the top 10. I don't think he's a top 10 pick. I'm going to leave it there. All right. I see Blake Miller here in the first round, and that's. I thought Blake Miller had a chance. I thought Blake Miller had a chance to force his way into the first round conversation, entering this year, and I'll have to take a good look at his film to see if he's played to that level. Sometimes individuals certainly make their mark, but the teams don't do all that well. Clemson's offense is hard to watch, bro. It's just hard to watch. I think Blake Miller moves very well out there at right tackle. I like him in the top 50 or so picks, certainly. 30, I would need to confirm, but I like the thought process. That clearly PFN is higher on these offensive tackles compared to Pro Football Focus. The one I do want to see. In fact, Lolu here is at 13, I believe. PFF had him, almost at 30, 28 or so. So definitely higher on the tackles here at Pro Football Network. Go a little further. Manuel McNeil Warren is a safety from Toledo that I've heard quite a bit. They seem to be a little bit lower on Amari Washington, but nothing crazy. Serveld, German Bernard has had a really good season. Overton, Chris Johnson, Kenyatta Jackson. Okay. Okay. I was going to say that this is pretty solid, but now I'm seeing a couple of things that I disagree with. So R. Mason Thomas, I think they're definitely too low on him. Cassius Howell, I there's no way. There's no way. 58. Mississippi, I'm not liking this one at all. This almost feels like the David Bailey type of situation, right? Even if you don't have Howell in the first half of the first one, it's got to be in the second half, man. Got to be. Which begs the question that they're a bit lower on some of these Oregon players too. It begs the question. Excuse me. There's Omar Cooper and D'Angelo Ponte. Indiana's got good football players, man. Where is Akeem Mesidor? Oh, they got Akeem Mesidor 101. Yeah, way too hard. Way too low. Entirely too low. I think they're too low on Joshua Josephs as well. Interesting. I don't hate the TJ Parker ranking. I think that makes sense for Ngalele and Overton. But I think they're definitely too low on Thomas Howell, Josephs, and Mesidor. Yeah, criminally low. Interesting. Okay. All right. Take a quick peek at their corners. That all seems to check out right there. Yeah, Malik Muhammad, fourth round prospect. Yeah, that makes sense. Even Chandler Rivers being a little bit down makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I disagree with this. I did see something that I disagree with. Keontae Scott should not be 150. Should not be 150. In fact, let me double check where PFF had him. Because I don't know that I confirmed. I think he's a player that we're going to see go earlier than most probably expect. I think Keontae Scott should have been, perhaps a Thorpe Award winner, man. I think he played that good this season. I think being injured toward the end hurt his chances, though, for sure. Bear with me just a second. I'm working on a different tab that you can't see right now. Yeah, PFF has Keontae Scott 62nd overall, where Pro Football Network has him at 150. So I would expect an adjustment there before it's all said and done. Definitely too low on Keontae Scott. Okay. Got one more mock draft simulator I want to take a look at. It's the NFL mock draft database. We'll get a sense of their rankings here accordingly. Go ahead and leave me for the second round. I hear you. All right. Here we go. Let me just adjust myself. Okay. Now, I will say this about Mock Draft Simulator. They have always been bullish on Mendoza. From summer scouting, they have been bullish on Fernando Mendoza. So they deserve a lot of credit. They deserve a lot of credit. He has been within that top 5 to 6, prospects from jump. Um, Despite all of the changes and fluctuations with the Allers and Nussmeyers and Klubniks, and I know I'm missing some other names there. And those was always within the thick of things. So, ton of respect for the NFL Mock Draft Database for that reason. Dante Moore, Arvell Reeves, Ruben Bain. Again, too high for Carnell Tate, as far as I'm concerned. Jordan Tyson, Caleb Downs. Like the fact that Fano's the top 8 player. Maui Noah top 11. I'm okay with all of that. This is also happens to be the publication that has been lowest on David Bailey. So they finally acknowledge that Bailey is a first round prospect, but I think Bailey should be even higher, to be perfectly frank. Still too high on Ty Simpson. Um, I, I I wouldn't say Makai Lemon fifth overall, but certainly this is the area that I like Carnell Tate in, right around here, 17, 18. You're seeing some of those, the usual suspects at this point. Cassius Howell, first rounder, a little bit lower. First rounder, Gabe McDonald obviously worked his way in. Okay, again, another publication that is acknowledging the talent of Caleb Banks, right? Have him in the first round. There's you got Chris Bell, then Mississippi. Again, some usual suspects. This is one difference here. Athen Kalakamanus. Now, I want to give NFL Mock Draft Database some I want to defer to them to a certain point because again they were all over Mendoza, so it's what I got to take a look at. I think maybe they're just they're going to keep the quarterbacks up there because obviously teams tend to overdraft quarterbacks. So, but I need to check out this Rutgers quarterback. I'm not terribly familiar with him. There's Mason Thomas, Brazil, lower Romello height than it's seemingly everyone else. That's an interesting one. There's Blake Miller, Joshua Joseph, excuse me, Elijah Surratt. Still leaning a little bit towards Malik Muhammad, where I've seen others push him down the board a bit. Yeah. And the football draft database has a tendency to elevate the quarterbacks a little bit more. Jadarian Price. I like Jadarian Price. The season just didn't come together for Jacoby Lane. It was Lemon's year, man. Jacoby Lane's a big time prospect. I like how high they have Chandler Rivers. They were always higher on Chandler Rivers than most. Carter Smith, Pounds. Again, Indiana's gonna be tough. There's big citrus there out of Iowa State. Jonah. I'm looking for my guy Mesidor. 88. Too low. Too low. Got him in the third round. I think respectable per se, respectable, but entirely too low for my liking. Again, I think this has a lot to do with his age. Let's see. Is there anything else here that? No, I don't think so. All right. Okay. So that we get a little sense of what the industry is thinking among these prospects. I think there is a decent level of consensus. I think the major differences between these various publications is the feelings around as compared to me, not amongst themselves, but compared to me. I think the industry is higher on Carnell Tate than I am. That doesn't say that I don't believe Carnell Tate should be selected in the first round. I just don't think he's a top 5, top 10 prospect. I am higher on Mesidor than these publications are for sure. Call it the Canes bias, but just turn the film on, man. I'm higher on CJ Allen than the publications are, although they all have him in the first round, so I respect that. I noticed with PFN Mock Draft Database, they are higher on the top 2 tackles, Fano and Maui Noah. I kind of align with that compared to PFF, whom are much lower on these tackles. I think those 2 tackles in particular, are going to go much earlier than PFF is suggesting. Yeah, as I mentioned, the Ty Simpson thing. It's seemingly most of the industry simulators have that address, but Mock Draft Database tends to kind of buoy the quarterbacks here. Yeah. Caleb Banks, obviously well respected in the industry. Chris Bell, man. Chris Bell, Mississippi. I think Everybody kind of has him pegged as a top 40 prospect, which makes a ton of sense. I think after he runs, assuming he runs, he's going to force his way into the first round conversation. You know, 6'2", 220. He might run sub 4.4. If he does, he's not getting out of the first round. He won't. Yeah, I don't think there's any, aside from what I've already mentioned, I don't think there's any big discrepancies. Denzel Boston certainly getting the respect he deserves. Let's see, you mentioned I picked Minnesota a few times last year's mock until he decided to go back to school. Yeah, yeah, it did come as a surprise, but I'm so glad he did. I'm so glad he did. It shouldn't hurt him. It should not hurt him. The way he's played, it should not hurt him. It should land him in those top 50 picks or so. It really should. And the only reason why I go as high as 50 is because of his age. He's going to be an older rookie. We're talking about a second contract at 29, 30 years of age. All right. Good stuff. Well, that's gonna do it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is C. Shout out. Good seeing you. I'm working on it. I got some time that's gonna be freed up, so I'm working on our mock draft simulator. So which will obviously reflect our rankings, my rankings. So we can take a good look at that. We can start getting into these mock drafts with a bit more fervor and consistency. And of course, once the Senior Bowl comes and goes, I mentioned I will be on location. I think this is year 7 or 8 in a row. So looking forward to that. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think they get it done. Um, Once we get into that, we'll start doing those individual team 7 round mock drafts. That's always a lot of fun. Want to get through all 32, so we'll be hitting that pretty hard and heavy here as things wind down in terms of college football as well as the NFL. Right, we're going into week 18. Playoff seedings at stake, a couple playoff spots at stake. So a lot to look forward to this weekend. I want to wish everybody a happy, prosperous, and healthy 2026 New Year. And I will see you guys same time next week. All right. Have a great one. Take care.